The squeak of wet rubber against polished marble was the only sound Marcus made, but in the hushed elegance of Grand Heritage Bank, it sounded like a scream. 10-year-old Marcus Hayes froze near the revolving doors, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, the November wind in Chicago was howling, carrying the first bite of winter, but inside, the air was still, scented with expensive coffee and fresh pine needles from the towering Christmas tree in the center of the lobby. He looked down at his feet. His sneakers, bought from a thrift store 2 years ago, were wrapped in silver duct tape at the toes to keep the water out. They left small, damp smudges on the pristine floor. Shoes protect your feet, Marcus, but they don't define your soul. Grandma Beatrice used to say that every morning while she tied his laces, her fingers rough from years of scrubbing floors but gentle on his skin. She was gone now, leaving him with nothing but her memories, a terrifyingly empty apartment, and the brown envelope he now clutched against his chest. He took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage she always said he carried in his pockets. He wasn't here to beg. He was here to do business. He walked toward the teller counters, passing men in gray wool suits and women clutching designer handbags who parted around him as if he were invisible, or worse, contagious. At the third window, a young teller named Sarah was absent-mindedly popping her gum. When Marcus approached, her eyes didn't meet his. They dropped instantly to his oversized, puffy coat faded blue, and 2 sizes too big, and then to the damp sneakers. Her nose wrinkled slightly, a reflex she didn't even try to hide. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't ask how she could help. Instead, she pressed a button under the counter and leaned back, crossing her arms. Can I help you, son?" The voice didn't come from Sarah, but from behind him. It wasn't kind. It was the smooth, practiced baritone of someone used to giving orders. Marcus turned around to see a man who looked like he owned the building. Preston Vance, the branch manager, stood there in a tailored navy suit that cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe for a lifetime. He smelled of musk and sharp cologne. He wasn't smiling. He was looking at Marcus the way one looks at a stain on a silk tie. "I need to check my balance, sir," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly but his chin held high, just like Grandma taught him. Preston blinked, then looked around the lobby as if sharing a private joke with the wealthy patrons. He let out a laugh, a short, sharp bark of amusement that cut through the quiet hum of the bank. "Check your balance?" Preston repeated, loud enough for the line of customers to hear. He stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Look around you, kid. Does this look like a playground? Or maybe you're lost. The soup kitchen is 3 blocks east." "I have an account," Marcus insisted, gripping the envelope tighter. "My grandmother left it to me. And I'm the tooth fairy," Preston sneered, his veneer of professional politeness vanishing completely. "This is Grand Heritage Bank, kid, not a welfare office for street children. We serve real customers here. People who contribute to society, not people who drag mud onto my floor." Marcus felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He wanted to run. He wanted to disappear. But the weight of the envelope anchored him. "Please," he whispered. Preston turned his back, waving a hand dismissively at the security guard. "Thomas, get this stray out of my lobby before he stains the carpet." The word security hung in the air, sharp and heavy, freezing the bustle of the lobby instantly. It was a command that stripped away the pretense of polite society, leaving only the raw, ugly edge of authority. Thomas, the bank security guard, stood near the grand entrance pillars. He was a man in his late 50s with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much of the world's unfairness. At Preston's shout, his hand instinctively moved to his belt, but his feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. He looked at the boy Marcus standing small and trembling in that oversized coat, and for a heartbreaking second, he didn't see a stranger. He saw himself 40 years ago, standing in a department store while a manager accused him of stealing a candy bar he had paid for. The shame of that memory burned in his chest, hot and fresh. Thomas took a step forward, his heavy boots echoing on the marble. He could feel the eyes of every customer on him. He wanted to speak up, to say that the boy had done nothing but ask a question. But then the image of his mounting bills flashed through his mind: the mortgage payment due on Friday, his wife's medication, the pension he was just 3 years away from collecting. Silence was the currency he had to pay to keep his life stable. Hating himself with every fiber of his being, Thomas lowered his head and walked toward Marcus, his face a mask of practiced indifference. But Marcus didn't run. He didn't cry out. He watched the guard approach, then turned his gaze back to Preston Vance. The fear was still there, shimmering in his dark eyes, but beneath it lay a bedrock of stubborn dignity. "I am not a stray," Marcus said, his voice quiet but steady enough to carry in the sudden silence. "And I don't need charity." With trembling fingers, Marcus reached into the worn brown envelope he had been clutching so desperately. He bypassed the letter from his grandmother and pulled out a thin, rectangular object. He held it out. It wasn't a crumpled dollar bill or a handful of change. It was a card. Sleek, heavy, and black. A Platinum Reserve debit card. The sight of it stopped Preston cold. The smirk faltered on his lips for a fraction of a second. He snatched the card from Marcus's hand with a scoff, ready to dismiss it as a toy or a library card. But as the plastic hit his palm, the weight of it was undeniable. He turned it over, inspecting the magnetic strip, the holographic chip, the embossed name, Marcus Hayes. The lobby watched in suspended animation. Mrs. Clara, a regular client draped in a cashmere coat, stood near the velvet ropes. She saw the card. She saw the boy's terrified bravery. She shifted her designer purse from one hand to the other, her face tightening with something that looked like guilt. She knew this was wrong. She knew she should say something. But the fear of causing a scene, of losing her own status in this sanctuary of wealth, kept her mouth shut. She looked away, pretending to study a brochure on low-interest loans. Preston's shock quickly morphed into something uglier, malicious disbelief. He held the card up high, pinching it between two fingers as if it were contaminated evidence in a courtroom. "Stolen," he announced loudly, addressing the audience of silent bystanders rather than the boy. "Obviously stolen. A kid from your neighborhood, dressed like that, with a platinum card? Who did you take this from, boy? Did you snatch a purse? Did you break into a mailbox?" "It's mine." Marcus's voice cracked, the injustice finally piercing his composure. "My grandma gave it to me. It's my name on it." "Right. And I'm the King of England." Preston laughed again, but this time it was forced, covering his own confusion with aggression. He wasn't going to check the card. He wasn't going to swipe it. That would mean admitting there was a possibility, however slim, that he was wrong. And men like Preston Vance did not admit they were wrong, especially not to children in taped-up shoes. He tossed the card onto the counter. It skidded across the marble surface with a sharp clack. "I've been in banking for 15 years, Preston declared, puffing out his chest. "I know a fraud when I see one. I'm not running that card. I'm confiscating it." He pointed a manicured finger toward the vestibule, the glass-enclosed area between the inner lobby and the outer street doors. It was a transitional space, neither fully inside nor outside, cold and drafty. "Sit over there," he barked. "Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. I'm calling headquarters to report a fraud and identify the real owner." Marcus looked at the card lying on the counter, then at Thomas, who was staring at his own boots, unable to meet the boy's eyes. There was no help coming. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence of the witnesses was louder than Preston's shouting. Slowly, Marcus turned. He walked toward the glass cage Preston had pointed to, his taped sneakers squeaking with every heavy step. Marcus sat on the metal chair, feeling invisible as wealthy customers walked by, averting their eyes, while his phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Uncle Julian. 20 minutes felt like 20 years when you are 10 years old, alone, and being watched like a criminal. Marcus sat rigid on the metal chair in the vestibule, the small glass-enclosed space that separated the bank's warm interior from the biting Chicago wind. It was a purgatory of sorts, too cold to be comfortable, but transparent enough that everyone inside could see him. The metal of the seat seeped a deep, aching chill through his thin trousers, settling into his bones. He watched his breath fog up the glass in front of him, creating a temporary shield that faded as quickly as it formed. Through the pain, the bank looked like a different world, bathed in golden light and holiday cheer, while he was left in the gray, drafty silence. He slipped his hand into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the worn paper of Grandma Beatrice's letter. He didn't need to take it out to know what it said. He had memorized the shape of her looping handwriting, the way the ink was slightly smudged on the word, love. Dignity is carried, she had written. It is not something they give you, Marcus. It is something you hold inside, like a flame. Don't let them blow it out. He repeated the words in his head like a prayer, trying to straighten his spine, trying to stop his bottom lip from trembling. He looked down at his shoes, the source of all this trouble. The duct tape on the left toe was peeling slightly. Grandma had repaired them 3 times, humming a gospel song while she worked. Good as new, she would say, even when they weren't. Inside the lobby, life moved on without him. He watched Preston Vance standing near the coffee station with Sarah. They were laughing. Preston held a steaming ceramic mug, gesturing casually as he told a story. Every few seconds, his eyes would flick toward the vestibule, his expression hardening with annoyance, as if Marcus were a piece of trash that the janitor had forgotten to sweep up. It was that casual cruelty that hurt more than the shouting, the fact that to them, Marcus wasn't a frightened child waiting for his family. He was just an eyesore, a nuisance to be managed before lunch. His phone buzzed against his thigh, startling him. He pulled it out with clumsy, frozen fingers. It was a text from Uncle Julian. Almost there. Traffic is heavy. Hold tight, champ. Don't let them scare you. Marcus tried to type back, I'm trying, but his thumbs were too numb, and his eyes were blurring. Before he could hit send, the heavy glass door from the lobby swung open. Preston stepped into the vestibule. He didn't bring warmth with him. He brought a gust of expensive cologne and impatience. He didn't look like a man waiting for police anymore. He looked like a man who was done playing games. The police are busy with real crimes, Preston said, his voice echoing in the small space. He didn't offer the card back. He kept it tucked in his breast pocket. And I'm done babysitting. I have wealthy clients arriving in 10 minutes, and I don't want them seeing this. He gestured vaguely at Marcus, at the coat, the shoes, the entire existence of him. My uncle is coming, Marcus said, his voice small, squeezed tight by the lump in his throat. He just texted. He's almost here. Preston rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture of exhaustion. Right. The imaginary uncle. Just like the imaginary money and the imaginary grandmother. He leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Marcus's. The look in his eyes was cold, stripped of any professional veneer. You know, kid, let me give you some advice. If your grandmother really existed, and if she really loved you, she would be ashamed to see you sitting here, begging and lying to decent people. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. They bypassed his defenses and struck the one place he couldn't protect. Grandma Beatrice, who worked double shifts, who walked in the rain, who saved every penny being ashamed of him. The dam broke. A single, hot tear escaped, tracking a line through the dust on his cheek. Preston saw the tear and smiled, satisfied. He had won. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder of his puffy coat, a rough, dismissive shove. He barked. Go find a dumpster or a shelter. That's where you belong. Marcus didn't fight back. He couldn't. The insult to his grandmother had drained the fight out of him. He let himself be pushed through the outer automatic doors, stumbling slightly as his taped sneaker caught on the rubber mat. The doors hissed shut behind him, sealing the warmth, the light, and his grandmother's card inside. The wind hit him instantly, biting through his clothes, carrying the sting of snowflakes. He stood on the concrete sidewalk, shivering, utterly alone, while the city traffic roared indifferently past him. As Marcus wiped his eyes, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class turned the corner and glided silently to the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom like predator eyes. The driver's side door opened, not with a slam, but with the heavy solid click of precision engineering that commanded immediate attention. From the sleek black Mercedes emerged a man who seemed to suck the grayness right out of the afternoon. Julian Hayes stood 6'2", dressed in a bespoke charcoal Italian suit that fit him like armor. He didn't run. He moved with the terrifying calm of a storm front gathering on the horizon. He walked straight to the shivering boy on the sidewalk, ignoring the slush that splattered onto his polished leather shoes. When he knelt down, bringing his face level with Marcus, the hardness in his eyes softened instantly into something fierce and protective. I'm here, champ, Julian said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the wind. He pulled Marcus into a hug, not caring about the wet, puffy coat or the snot and tears. "Did they hurt you?" Marcus shook his head against his uncle's shoulder, his small body hitching with sobs. He laughed at Grandma's shoes. "He threw me out. He said she would be ashamed." Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering beneath his ear. He pulled back, gripping Marcus's shoulders firmly. "Listen to me closely. Your grandmother was a queen. And you? You are a king in waiting. They don't get to define us. Ever." He stood up, offering his hand. "We're going back in." Marcus hesitated, shrinking back. I don't want to." "Please, Uncle Julian. They'll call the police." "Let them," Julian said, his voice hard as granite. "But they won't. Because we aren't going in there to beg, Marcus. We are going in to remind them who they work for." At that moment, a second car, a silver SUV, pulled up sharply behind the Mercedes. A woman stepped out, closing her door with a decisive thud. It was Evelyn Sterling, the regional director of the bank. She was legendary in the district. Sharp, fair, and utterly ruthless when it came to protocol. Julian exchanged a brief, grim nod with her. They flanked Marcus on either side, a phalanx of power and justice, and marched toward the automatic doors. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere was still relaxed. Preston Vance was leaning against the counter, regaling Sarah with a story about his weekend golf trip, his back to the entrance. He felt untouchable, the master of his domain. That illusion shattered the moment the doors hissed open. The sudden drop in volume in the lobby was palpable. Preston turned, annoyance flashing on his face at the intrusion, but the expression curdled instantly into pure, unadulterated terror. He saw Evelyn Sterling first. His boss's boss. A woman who rarely visited branches unless heads were about to roll. Preston scrambled to straighten his tie, his face paling to the color of old parchment. "Miss Sterling," he stammered, stepping forward with a forced, sweating smile. What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting." Then, his eyes drifted to the man standing beside her. The tall, imposing figure in the charcoal suit. And finally, his gaze fell to the hand that the man was holding, the small, trembling hand of the black kid in the worn-out sneakers he had just thrown into the street. The connection fired in Preston's brain like a short circuit. The air left his lungs. "Mr. Hayes," Preston choked out, his voice cracking. He recognized Julian Hayes, now the CEO of Meridian Capital, the bank's largest institutional investor. The man whose picture hung in the corporate boardroom. I didn't know that you knew." Julian ignored Preston's extended hand. He walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture, leading Marcus straight to the center of the lobby. The silence was absolute. Every customer, every teller, even Thomas the security guard, stood frozen. "We aren't here for a social visit, Preston," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room like a gavel strike. "My nephew came here to conduct a simple transaction." He was insulted. He was mocked. And he was thrown out of a building that my family's investments helped build. It was a misunderstanding. Preston pleaded, backing up until he hit the counter. "Sir, please, if I had known who he was. I was just following protocol for security." "Protocol?" Julian stepped closer, his shadow falling over the shrinking manager. "You didn't check his ID. You didn't check his card. You checked his shoes. You decided he was nobody because he didn't look like you." Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked to Evelyn for help, but her face was a mask of cold fury. Julian turned his gaze to the teller, Sarah, who was trembling so hard her name tag was shaking. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply pointed a finger at the counter where she stood frozen. "Pull up his account. Right now." The silence in the lobby was absolute. Not a phone rang, not a shoe clicked, as Sarah's trembling fingers typed on the keyboard. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the keys sounded like gunfire in the quiet room. Preston Vance stood paralyzed against the counter, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He watched the monitor as if it were a bomb counting down. Behind him, Julian Hayes stood like a statue of judgment, his hand resting protectively on Marcus's shoulder. Even Thomas, the security guard, had moved closer, craning his neck, drawn in by the gravitational pull of the moment. The computer beeped a cheerful, innocent sound that signaled the account had been retrieved. Sarah gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at the screen, her eyes widening until they looked like saucers. Preston leaned in, desperate to find an error, a glitch, anything to justify his cruelty. But the numbers on the screen were stark, bold, and undeniable. $524,850. Read it, Julian commanded softly. Preston swallowed hard, his throat clicking dryly. $524,850. The number hung in the air, heavy and impossible. A gasp rippled through the gathered crowd. Mrs. Clara, the wealthy bystander, let her designer purse slip slightly from her grip. $500,000. In the account of a 10-year-old boy wearing taped-up sneakers. Do you know where that money came from, Mr. Vance? Julian asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the lobby, addressing everyone. My mother, Beatrice Hayes, was a school janitor. For 40 years, she scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. She took the bus in the rain. She wore the same winter coat for 15 years. She ate leftovers so she could save every single penny. Julian reached down and gently touched the toe of Marcus's worn sneaker. And she bought these shoes at a thrift store, not because she was poor, but because she was sacrificing. She denied herself every comfort so that her grandson could go to college, so that he could have a future where he wouldn't have to beg. Preston stared at the screen, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The magnitude of his mistake was crashing down on him. He hadn't just insulted a boy, he had mocked the life's work of a woman who had more character in her little finger than he had in his entire body. I didn't know, Preston stammered, his voice cracking. He looked from Julian to Marcus, his eyes pleading. Sir, if I had known he had money, if I had known about the account, I would have treated him differently. That is exactly the problem, Julian said, his voice dropping to a register that was colder than the wind outside. You respect the wallet, not the human. You saw a boy in old clothes and decided he was trash. My mother wore old shoes so this boy could stand tall. You judged the book by its cover, and you failed in the most disgraceful way possible. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but there were no words left. He was stripped bare before his employees and his customers. The illusion of his superiority had evaporated. Evelyn Sterling stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air like ice. Hand over your keys, Mr. Vance. You're done here. Preston Vance walked out of his own office carrying a cardboard box, looking smaller than the 10-year-old boy he had tried to crush. The walk from his desk to the exit was only 30 feet, but it must have felt like miles. He didn't look left or right. The arrogant stride was gone, replaced by a shuffle of defeat. No one spoke to him. No one offered a sympathetic glance. The employees he had bullied and the customers he had preened for simply watched him fade away, stripped of his title and his power. The revolving door spun once, depositing him into the cold street, and just like that, the heavy atmosphere in the bank lifted, as if a window had been thrown open to let in fresh air. With the source of the toxicity gone, the frozen tableau in the lobby broke. Thomas, the security guard, took a deep, shuddering breath. He adjusted his cap, but this time, he didn't retreat into the background. He walked straight toward Marcus. The heavy boots that had felt like lead anchors earlier now moved with purpose. He stopped in front of the boy and slowly knelt down on one knee, bringing himself to eye level, something no one at the bank had done for Marcus all day except his uncle. I'm sorry, young man, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't offer excuses about his mortgage or his pension. He simply offered the truth. I stood there and watched. I should have spoken up. You have more courage in your little finger than I had in my whole body today. Marcus looked at the older man. He saw the regret etched in the deep lines of Thomas's face. Grandma Beatrice had always said that forgiveness was a gift you give yourself, not the other person. Marcus nodded slowly. It's okay, he whispered. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. No, Thomas shook his head, standing up and placing a hand over his heart. Thank you. Julian squeezed Marcus's shoulder. Ready to go, champ? We have some hot chocolate to find. And maybe we stop by the store? Get you some winter boots. Marcus looked down at his sneakers. The duct tape was still peeling. The soles were still cracked. But as he looked at them now, he didn't feel shame. He thought about his grandmother scrubbing floors late at night. He thought about the $524,850 she had saved for him, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. These weren't just old shoes. They were a monument to her love. They were the reason he was standing here, victorious. I think I'll keep these for a little while longer, Marcus said, smiling for the first time that day. Grandma walked in them so I could fly. Julian smiled back, a genuine expression of pride. Okay then. Let's fly. Marcus pushed the door open himself. The wind was still blowing, swirling snow around the entrance, but strangely, he didn't feel cold anymore. The warmth of his victory and the hand of his uncle shielded him. He stepped onto the sidewalk, holding his uncle's hand, leaving footprints in the light snow proof that he had been there and that he mattered. The footprints Marcus left in the snow that day have long since melted, but the lesson remains etched in stone for all of us. True worth is never found in the price of a suit or the shine of a shoe, but in the quiet dignity we carry within us and the silent sacrifices of those who loved us first. So, the next time you see someone standing alone in the cold, remember Marcus and his grandmother's legacy and choose to be the one who offers a hand, not a judgment.